I'm a little out of practice with this, but welcome to $5 Gaming. Wait. It's become pretty tough as of late to find games, physical games, for $5 or less. But it is still possible if you cast a wide enough net and you know where to look. For example, I got this game for $1. That's a price usually reserved for old sports games. And by old, I mean 4 or 5 years, because sports games depreciate faster in value than most cars. The roots for Martian Gothic required taking a step way back and looking at the Commodore 64 and the ZX Spectrum. Two home computers that I'm neither old enough nor British enough to have grown up with. In all seriousness though, their role in video games is sometimes overlooked. In the mid-80s, there was a multi-year stretch where the C64 outsold IBM, Apple, and Atari machines in the US, and the ZX Spectrum for decades was the best-selling British computer. If that means anything to you. This is when Creative Reality was founded, a game studio that's almost impossible to find info on, partially because some chuckle fucks use the same name for their AI abomination factory. That and their website, which has been defunct for years, was programmed in Flash, a dead platform. Thus, even with Flash emulators like Ruffle, the only thing I could get out of the site was a pair of images of the front page. Anyway, the point is that in 1994, they produced several games for the ZX Spectrum and Commodore 64, one of which was called Dreamweb, a top-down point-and-click adventure game with cyberpunk stylings and a whole lot of murder to preserve some otherworldly structure known as the Dreamweb, lest it get destroyed and allow mankind to spiral into chaos. It was also briefly banned in Australia for showing a,
Penis.
It got a pretty mixed reception when it came out, and today, outside of a small but dedicated group, it's not really considered good. In part because of how it played, and in part because it flubs the "is this real or is the main character just insane" story thread. However, the game came with something that handled the latter much better, a printed novella titled Diary of a Mad Man. Yes, I have to say it that way, look at how it's written. This must have just been a thing around that time, because I have another novella for a different 90s game, Stonekeep. Do not ask me about Bones of the Ancestors. It's a prologue to Dreamweb, which, I mean, it's supposed to be read before playing the game, but it also makes it apparent what's really going on and kinda kills the intrigue. It's a decent read though. Also, players need to read this because the game has a door that's password locked, and the password is in the diary. The guy who wrote this, in real life, not in the game, was Stephen Marley, a British writer who had a few published novels at the time in his Chia Black Dragon series.
Chia?
No, Chia's a Chinese half-demon woman who... You ever see a drawing and, the more you look at it, the more things just don't make sense about it?
Chia?
After writing this novella, Creative Reality eventually went to work on a game called Unification, alongside Coyote Development Limited. Since they were pleased with Marley's work with Diary of a Mad Man, and Marley himself was interested in this relatively new form of storytelling called video games, he was brought in as a designer and writer for this new project. It started as a point-and-click adventure game, but transitioned into survival horror, and the end result was Martian Gothic Unification in the year 2000. Well, actually it was 2000 for the PC version. And for some reason the PS1 version only in Australia. Europe and North America didn't see the console version until late 2001, possibly because of a mandate to have it be virtually the same as the PC version. Either way, the PS1 version of this game didn't come out until after the PS2 launched in most territories. Yeah, except Japan, they didn't get this at all. Shikata ga arimasen. And because it's a survival horror game I found for $1, this qualifies as a cheap scare. I've been waiting for years to use that graphic again. This was a game nobody could agree on. It got reviews ranging from 1 out of 5 to 8 out of 10, with a bunch of other scores hovering somewhere in between. That's approaching Deadly Premonition levels of how am I supposed to rate this? And not to get too far ahead of myself, but there was one person who worked on Martian Gothic Unification. Fuck it, let's just call it Martian Gothic. There was one person who worked on Martian Gothic who really did not like how it turned out. Who was this mystery person? Was he or she justified? Find out in... Actually, I don't know how long this video is yet, so find out... eventually. The game starts with a meteorite from Mars crashing into Antarctica in 11,000 BCE. Huh, I wonder what that means. Cut to the distant future of 2019, with an ominous British lady narrator making a somewhat awkward parallel between 3 people on a spacecraft bound for Mars and... a Hamlet quote.
I could be bounded in a nutshell, and count myself a king of infinite space, were it not that I have bad dreams.
This Hamlet quote makes more sense later in the game, except when it doesn't, but it's also a line that's not about having nightmares. It's about Hamlet's generally dour mood after all he's been through, which doesn't really apply here. This is like when American politicians play Born in the USA at their rallies, and they're oblivious to how the song is about how the American dream is dead and buried. It just looks awkward to whoever's paying attention. As the ship is shown flying to Mars, the narrator spoils the ending.
3 are coming. Only 2 will leave.
Well, now I know not to give a shit about any of them. They all enter the Mars base from different airlocks, the reason for which becomes apparent later, and the game begins. There's actually a ton of backstory to this game, particularly after accessing the database at the mission site and unlocking the files. Unlike, say, Resident Evil, which sprinkles in backstory through several found files, here the backstory is largely delivered in a few voice notes, and wall after wall after wall after wall of yellow text. So I'll just give you the extremely abbreviated version in the instruction booklet. A meteorite crashed into Antarctica over 12,000 years ago. Said meteorite was found in 1984 because we will never stop referencing that year, and microscopic alien fossils were discovered on it in 1996. 2009, the first manned mission to Mars lands and they immediately start building a base. After just landing on Mars. For the first time. Ignoring how bad an idea that is, I'm going to assume they all went the Matt Damon route and survived off of potatoes grown with their own shit. And in 2018, one last desperate transmission from the base says that if they send people to the site, tell them to stay alone, stay alive. Which our 3 heroes did without question. Speaking of the instruction booklet, check out the cover art for this game. This is actually the reason I got this. It's not because the Martian Gothic text looks like they just ripped off the Final Fantasy font. It's because of the 3 people on the cover. I mean, I know they're supposed to be screaming, but it also looks like they're singing.
Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Stay alone, stay alive.
After landing and getting into the base, our 3 team members, Kenzo, Matlock, and Karn, all dryly recap what just happened.
I've just crash-landed Zeus 19 within 2 kilometers of Vita Base. Fire broke out on landing, forcing Matlock, Karn, and myself into emergency evacuation.
You know, I couldn't tell at first that the ship crash-landed because, well, the intro didn't show it. They just cut to the outline of a ship obscured by a dust storm with some smoke coming out of the top of it. So Kenzo recaps the exciting crash and escape, which we didn't see. Matlock recaps almost running out of air before finding a working airlock, which we didn't see. and Karn describes the panic of scrambling toward the base, which we didn't see. Well, we did see them go from the ship to the airlocks, but none of them seemed to be in a hurry. And so the game begins with Karn. The controls are all first-person based, and as you might expect from what is basically space adventure survival horror, there's a lot of finding things to interact with, items to pick up, and puzzles to solve. The game both helps and doesn't help by having a magnifying glass appear when close to interaction points. Sometimes these points extend really far away from what they're tied to. Other times their range is so short it's easy to miss them. Several key interactables are not differentiated from the background, which makes it hard to tell that they're important. Making matters worse is that sometimes the magnifying glass won't appear, and other times you won't be able to interact with something unless you're standing perfectly still, making it easy, and frankly likely, to miss important items. This, combined with the casual saunter and slow jog of every character, tends to give the game a slow, plodding pace throughout. What also doesn't help is the wildly inconsistent ambience. Sometimes there will be absolutely nothing, and other times there will be what sounds like over-the-top 1950s radio drama backing tracks. These can get so loud and play at such bad times that they drown out the dialogue, which I'm guessing that's why when I started the game, subtitles were turned on by default. While we're on things I tried to change in the settings, I tried recording this game in as few sessions as possible because sometimes when I would load it up again, between the main menu and gameplay, the screen would shift to the right and I would have to go into the settings and readjust it every time. See, a younger version of me would have done something like physically move the camera to one side or take the video clip and then move it and there would be a black bar, but we are well past that now. And from this point on, we are only going to engage in intelligent, observational humor for video. Anyway, at the start of the game, both Karn and Matlock are stuck in the decontamination area behind doors that won't open.
Decontamination sequence completed.
I feel more contaminated now than I did before.
I feel like a bug being sprayed by insecticide.
This introduces one of the core mechanics of the game, swapping characters. At any time, the player can shift between controlling any of the three leads, something which will become even more important as the game goes on. Kenzo, the computer guy, is the only one who can get through it first.
There was something wrong about that decontamination. Something very wrong.
As such, he's the one who sees what happened to the Mars base and everyone in it before anyone else. There's probably a proper term for this in storytelling and game design, but I couldn't find it, so we're just going to introduce something I'm going to call the Kenzo effect. In any storytelling medium, the way characters react to what happens to them or around them has an influence on the player's own response to the same stimulus. Think, for example, about how Samus reacts to finding Kraid in Metroid Dread. He's a big imposing alien threat, but she isn't afraid of him at all, and thus neither is the player. This is part of why Resident Evil, in spite of its accidental comedy, still managed to make some players uncomfortable, particularly in Jill's scenario. When Jill first encounters a zombie looming over Kenneth's corpse, she runs back to Barry exclaiming that she saw a monster.
What is it?
Watch out! It's a monster!
Let me take care of this.
When she finds the body of another Stars Bravo team member, she expresses a mix of horror and disgust.
It's awful!
Even if not acted well, at all, the message gets across. Jill and Barry are deeply bothered by what they find, and that feeds into the player's perception of the scenario these characters are in. Compare this with how Kenzo reacts to the first dead body he sees.
If anyone here was alive, would they have left the corpse lying in a corridor?
Not even the slightest change in tone. But wait, that pales in comparison to what he does in the very next room.
Well, call me a techno-zen hippie, and I've been called that before. But there's a dead man hovering in front of me in the Boulevard Saint-Michel. I can hear him speak, in my mind. So, we've got reanimation, telepathy, and levitation. Now I call that downright supernatural. An alien haunting.
Kenzo.
If Kenzo isn't even slightly bothered by any of this, why should anyone else be? Also, this is what the floating telepathic corpse does if you get near him. He just shoves you to the ground. It doesn't even do damage to you. This thing is more monster than man, but also more hall monitor than monster. It's worth noting that Stephen Marley designed and wrote the game, but he did more than that. Marley was also part of the casting and voice direction, and he even went under a pseudonym to lend his own voice to some minor characters, as well as the male zombies. He specifically directed the three main characters to have distinct personalities from each other, with Kenzo being a, quote, zoned out emotionally flat loner, unquote. So this isn't necessarily bad acting, just poorly thought out design having the most apathetic space cadet of a character be the one who sets the standard for what to be afraid of. Aside from Kenzo's voice actor not really being an actor, Marley shouldered the blame for reviewers critical of Kenzo's voice at the time. I will make the case that you could have Kenzo act pretty much the way he does in this game, and it would still work, if he were the last person to get out of the airlocks and see what was happening in the base. Have Matlock and Karn set the groundwork for fear, and then you have Kenzo's blasé attitude contrast with that, and maybe that could build suspicion of Kenzo. Does he have ulterior motives for being here? I mean, that wouldn't help with the plot as it appears in this game, but it's worth thinking about. Then again, this is how Matlock reacts the first time a dead body reanimates in front of her. Absolutely nothing. And this is how Karn reacts the first time. Also nothing. Hell, he started making half-hearted wisecracks by the third time this happened.
I had a feeling you were going to get up.
And then there's whatever the hell this reaction is.
There's something in Recyc Antechamber. It's big, it's mean, and you wouldn't want to share a beer with it, know what I'm saying?
Marley said that the three characters were supposed to have distinct personality traits. Kenzo being detached and impassive, Karn being passionate and assertive, and Matlock being perky and quirky. His words, not mine. That would be fine, except the writing and performances do not reflect this. Everyone sounds bored and dismissive, even when the script says they're taking it seriously.
Lambs to the slaughter. The hell with that. I'm no lamb.
It's like the atmosphere in the base is 40% oxygen and 60% NyQuil.
Close one.
Even at this point in the video, you've likely noticed that many rooms of the base keep changing their aesthetics, going from looking like they belong in a factory to looking like they belong in a mansion. That's not me splicing random parts of the game together. I often went through a door and the environment would completely change. Mansion to factory, factory to mansion, mansion to middle school boys' locker room. It was all very jarring because there was sometimes no rhyme or reason to it, and they wound up being distracting more than anything else. Sometimes the hallways look industrial, sometimes they don't. Sometimes the crew's rec rooms look like Tim Burton designed them, and sometimes they don't.
Neo-retro decor. A mishmash of styles from all over the place. The entire base was decorated in clashing designs supposed to supply visual variety for the base members. Doesn't do anything for me.
It's also apparent that Resident Evil played a part in the final game's design. After all, by the time this game released, Resident Evil Code Veronica was out. Stephen Marley said he played at least the first game and thought, what if Chris and the gang couldn't leave because they were on another planet with a near vacuum outside? This reminded him of a novel idea about a haunted house in space, and that served as the basis for Martian Gothic.
This is a haunted house on Mars.
And I hope you're ready for a tangent because Marley had a few things to say about Resident Evil and horror games in general. Bring up the scoreboard. First of all, Marley said it would be hard to play Resident Evil without laughing. Unless you played it on mute, I don't think there's any arguing that. He also said in Martian Gothic you legit can't leave. Unlike Resident Evil, where you're stuck in a mansion with all sorts of monsters because of 3 or 4 dogs outside the front door. I'm guessing he just didn't pay attention to the intro at all and missed the part about the big groups of zombies attacking people outside, or how those and the Cerberus dogs likely aren't the only thing out there, or the fact that the team is in the Arklay Mountains and would have to run back to town on foot among every T-virus creature in the forest because their helicopter abandoned them. He mentioned that Martian Gothic has the occasional injection of humor because he found the constant grimness of the Dead Space series monotonous and depressing. You can break from grimness without resorting to humor and dramatically shifting the tone. Also, I haven't actually played any of the Dead Space games yet, but I know how some of you would react if I didn't say this was wrong. Lastly, he said he believed this was the first game to explain why there were random puzzles with useful items scattered around. I'm not counting the first Resident Evil because the puzzles in the mansion were largely explained after the fact. But Resident Evil 2 has some files which hint at why certain puzzles are there, as well as why certain items tied to those puzzles exist. And for a much broader example, Dee explained this by saying Laura was in a construct of her maniacal father's mind. So of course it was going to be a fucked up puzzle-riddled nightmare. Ironically, Martian Gothic can be called that too. Aside from certain items and interactables being difficult to find or see, Martian Gothic has a lot, and I do mean a lot, of in-game items. Hell, look at how much inventory space each character has. When I started this game, I was excited to see the amount of inventory space each character had. That did not last. Everyone starts off with a few items already in their inventory. And just like many items found throughout the base, some of these are completely useless. Ignoring things like health pickups and weapon ammo, it felt like almost 1/3 of the items I picked up didn't serve any purpose. Also, why did Karn automatically equip this toy gun? I didn't tell him to do that.
I'm gonna look real hard running around with a pop gun. I look pretty stupid holding this thing. I'll look even more stupid if I fire it.
It's nerf or nothing, Karn. This would all be fine if there were a decent way to get rid of these items, but there isn't. You cannot drop items in this game, and once you take items off of something like a dead body, you can't put it back. Also, keys are disposable. Instead of having one key that opens a few doors, each one disappears as soon as it's used, whether it's a key to a desk drawer or a colored key card. These can clutter the inventory even more because, in some cases, there are more copies of some keys in the game than there are doors they go to. This was done to ensure people didn't get stuck, but on your first playthrough, it's very likely you'll end up holding a couple extra keys with no more doors that they can be used on. The best you can do is find a locker or one of these hatches and toss all your trash and recycling into it. That or rearrange items among the 3 characters using vacuum tubes, which is how items can be transferred among everyone. This is necessary not just to get weapons and health items to everybody, but also items to solve puzzles. For those of you that have an intense fear of logistics, Martian Gothic will be absolutely terrifying to you. But wait, it gets worse. Since we were on Resident Evil earlier, remember how those games handle files? They all go to a separate files menu where the player can check any document or recording they picked up at any time. Martian Gothic does not do this. Here, every single file, be it a crumpled piece of paper with numbers on it, a crumpled piece of paper with the suggestion of words being on it, or a voice recording, each individual file and recording counts as a separate item. Even with the computer having a ton of information stored on it, there's a tidal wave of notes, voice notes, and documents, and that inventory, which looked huge at the beginning of the game, ends up filling extremely fast with a whole lot of trash. The only thing I can think of that's worse than having useless items you don't realize are useless is having a bunch of items you get early on that seem useless, and then suddenly you have to get all of them back for something that happens later in the game. Speaking of trash, Martian Gothic includes the worst game ever made.
Martian Mayhem, the worst video game in the solar system.
This was supposed to be a game within the game, but due to the rushed development cycle of Martian Gothic, that never happened. and so it's basically an unfinished radio play. This is on nearly every computer in the base and acts as a save point, with each computer it's on having a finite number of saves available, usually 12 or something close to that. It's like ink ribbons, except there are a whole lot more of these and they aren't transferable. You might ask, does that mean you can save nearly 100 times over the course of the game? And to that I say, yeah, you can. Even if some computers are in more dangerous spots than others, enemies will not attack right away when loading into these spots, and running out of saves is almost never an issue. I got a little sidetracked, but Martian Mayhem is unironically the best part of this game. Because it's the absolute worst.
How about we take turns shooting at the outer monster, signaling the alternation of gunfire by pressing the button with the thumb icon on it that we have on all our guns.
Okay, Rock. I'm ready for mayhem. Here comes the monster right now, and I'm gonna lick its arse. What, me?
If you can think of a way to mess up a line of dialogue, odds are Martian Mayhem has it. Excuse me, it's Martian Mayhem 2. There is no Martian Mayhem 1. Granted, this is done intentionally, but often when people try to act badly on purpose, it comes off as just awkward. Here, I can't help but smile when I hear this.
Don't growl at me, you monster. It's ass-licking time.
I can see something glinting on the other side of that mountain, but I can't quite reach it.
That's what I like about you.
I can't use that.
This time, it's personal.
I can't see that from here.
Look out! A British guy marching purposefully across the Martian plains. I claim this planet for the British Empire.
Suck on my thumb, funster. I have a big gun. This door is locked.
Look out! A monster. This door is locked. I can't see that.
I will say something that does work in this game's favor is going through the base in the early stages after Kenzo sees a couple bodies stand up and attack him. Once Karn gets loose and starts exploring, both he and Kenzo go through hallways with several dead bodies on the ground or leaning up against walls or sitting on benches. There is a little tension involved with which ones will stay down and which ones won't. At least until you realize these bodies all run on plot device standard time. The bulk of these enemies, called non-dead, will tend to get up and come after you when certain in-game events happen. A lot of them become active the moment one of the protagonists finds a weapon. Some come to life after you search their bodies, even if they have nothing on them, which prompts this animation. The way they react to finding nothing on a corpse is the way I react to finding nothing on a corpse. Being asked to describe why my car won't start. And some come to life by just interacting with certain objects, even if you just shot them down. Oh, that's another thing. Non-deads cannot be killed, just knocked down for a bit. So while it will seem like there's an absurd amount of ammo to find for the game's small selection of weapons, to the point that sometimes the ammo count will just glitch out, non-dead never stay down, and having to cross through hallways with several of them multiple times means running out of ammo unless you know exactly where to go and what to do, which... more on that later. There's one room where interacting with a machine will cause a nearby non-dead to revive. You have to use said machine several times a few seconds apart for a puzzle. So this one non-dead keeps getting up moments after supposedly being neutralized. I call this one the tub-thumping non-dead.
I get knocked down, but I get up again.
But these non-dead are also not particularly threatening. For one, everyone in this game can aim, fire, and reload while moving. This is great from a making the characters more capable standpoint, but takes much of the threat away from most enemies because they're still designed for a game where you can't do that. Resident Evil Survivor made this same mistake in the same year Martian Gothic was released. Even when you do get grabbed by them, which leads to an awkward music sting which may or may not play, They tend to be so easy to push away that they don't have a chance to deal much damage. This is how much health I lost after being bitten once and then mashing to shake them off. There's also the short attention span of these guys. Like an invisible fence for a dog, most non-dead will not pursue or even notice the player if they're outside of a certain space. Whether you're several feet away or within a few feet of them, they won't attack beyond this unseen boundary. Normally, if you switch off a character when they're in a space with non-dead, you'll get a warning that they're being attacked and have to switch back to them. But this territorial behavior gets so comical that I frequently left Karn in a hallway about 20 feet away from a patrolling non-dead, and he never got attacked. There's also a desk I would leave him behind in a room with 3 non-dead, one of which patrolled within a couple feet of him. None of them figured out how to reach Karn.
Well, you heard the FBI. They're extremely strict about pursuing suspects across international borders. And, you're just out of our jurisdiction.
Also, non-dead can't attack during most environment interactions outside of opening doors, so seeing a non-dead politely waiting for you to finish what you're doing, or straight up phasing through characters, is a surprisingly common sight. Going back to the amount of damage these guys do, the main way to regain health is health boosts, little hypodermic needles which can stack in your inventory. These are either found or made by Matlock when she finds a chemical extractor, which happens fairly early in the game. Just fill the machine with herbs, which do not stack for some reason, and yes, herbs, very original. Hit the switch and you can produce a hospital's worth of healing items and antidotes. The health boosts can replenish more than half of the health bar, so the only issue then is how each character gets them. Vacuum tubes. These are scattered around the base and can be used to send items between all 3 characters. With these, I rarely ever found myself short on healing items or ammo for any weapon or character. There is a caveat to this, and we'll get to it later in the video, but this ends up being a practical non-factor. But what about non-dead enemies? After all, the first Resident Evil, aside from zombies, had the Cerberus dogs, crows, snakes, wasps, spiders, sharks, chimera, and hunters to mix things up. And that's not counting any of the quote-unquote boss creatures. Martian Gothic's enemy count including bosses? 3. The other 2 enemies are extrudes, little spider things that are more of an annoyance than anything, and trimorphs, which are the one major threat as most of them can cause an instant game over. Now I know non-deads are the crew for the base, and the trimorphs do get explained later. But apparently the extrudes are something that the trimorphs create and then they scatter around to find prey. I don't remember where this was explained, but apparently that's what they're supposed to be. There's a kick button in this game, and since it doesn't do anything to non-dead, I'm guessing it's exclusively for knocking over extrudes for a moment, which, I mean, it takes longer to stop and kick them than just avoid their really long animations. Also, extrudes can poison your characters, but given their slow attacks, the fact you can't get hit by them while grabbed by non-dead, and how plentiful antidotes are, this didn't even become a minor annoyance, let alone a problem. The non-dead are not just 1/3 of the enemy roster, but far and away the most prevalent one. Combined with them constantly reviving, this made me so damn sick of dealing with these guys that what little dread they created was quickly replaced with annoyance. That and boredom from sometimes having to shoot down the same non-dead the 10th or 11th time. This was only compounded by the damage values for everything. While it's possible to shove a non-dead away pretty quickly, I could never get a feel for how much damage these things could do. Sometimes I would get grabbed and bitten repeatedly and only lose 1/10 of my health bar. But other times it would happen once or twice and bam, 20% of my health was gone. This also applies to weapon damage. With the Dillinger, the closest thing this game has to a Magnum, sometimes I would drop a non-dead in 1 or 2 shots, and other times a non-dead would take 8 shots before going down. And it's not a matter of different non-dead having different damage thresholds. I frequently had the same non-dead in the same area taking and dishing out different amounts of damage every time I came across them. And yes, viewer who's tuning out the sound of my voice and listening to the in-game audio, Martian Gothic does have some sound effects that were also used in Doom, another game involving Mars.
Heat Earth Bullet! Martian Dirtball!
The only way out is the rope hanging from the ceiling.
In the rare instances when I was low on ammo, sometimes I would just run into the non-dead and shake them off really quickly. More often than not, I would get past with barely a scratch because either their recovery time would be too slow for them to catch me, even with how stiff everybody controls and their methodical jog. The game considers this running, by the way. Or because I would shove the non-dead to the ground and they would lay there for several minutes as though I just emptied a full magazine into them. See this? Apparently this is the ideal way to deal with non-dead. After a little while, all three characters get out of their airlocks and start exploring the base. Sort of. Everyone has their own portion of the base that they're stuck in, with the bulkheads between all of them being sealed and some other doors just being broken or otherwise impassable. As such, the whole stay alone mandate is something you end up following without even trying through at least the first 2 or 3 hours. Now there's a new obstacle though, keeping everyone safe. I mentioned how other team members can get attacked off screen, but if you don't switch back to them and shake off the non-dead, apparently they'll just allow themselves to get chewed to death. Wait a minute. Is this game where that bitch from Lifeline learned the art of no self-defense? I need to take a moment to just pull back the curtain a little bit and explain how these videos are made. When I'm recording footage of the games, I do not check a walkthrough unless I am completely and hopelessly stuck. And in the decade and a half or so that I've been making videos for this channel, I don't think I've ever gotten stuck as often as when I played Martian Gothic. There are 3 reasons for this, and all but one involve the puzzles in this game. The one that doesn't is the camera. Half of the time, it's in a terrible position, where you either can't see a door or passageway you're supposed to go through. I couldn't find 2 locked doors and a hallway for the longest time because of this. Or the camera angle is way too low and a non-dead will partially or completely block your field of view. First off, I mentioned before that there are items in this game which do nothing but take up space. Well, the items which are useful aren't easily apparent, and they get used anywhere from almost immediately to several hours later. Near the end of the game, there's an elevator leading to the final areas which needs to be fixed. You know how you fix it? With a belt you can rip out of an exercise bike from so long ago that Matlock was still stuck in an airlock. That and it's voice activated with a piece of printer paper. There's also a point near the end of the game where an alien tissue sample needs to be picked up. How do you do this? With a pair of rubber gloves. That makes sense. These gloves are found in a tool shed, also from way before Matlock gets free. Second, some of these items aren't clearly visible or in obvious storage locations. For example, one puzzle requires fishing an item out of a drawer that you can't see. The one time it's in your range of movement, it's blocked by a statue in the foreground. Some of these items are carried by non-dead. You know what it's like to spend an hour at a door you need to go through but can't because it's locked? And you didn't shoot down and search the body of non-dead number 3 in a room you haven't thought about in a while and can't remember how to get to? Or how about needing to get a cutting tool from another non-dead body in a room you're otherwise not able to explore without getting torn apart by a trimorph? Yes, there's a map to help with getting around, but even with it, I could never get a handle on half of this damn base's layout. Partly because of how samey several rooms and hallways look. By the way, as someone who's colorblind, having a color-based key system for the map that I couldn't read sometimes, and having a color-based puzzle later in the game, great. Thanks for that. I see our mentioned being colorblind again. Drink! What the fuck? And third, some of these puzzle solutions make no goddamn sense. Something like spraying a trimorph with hydrochloric acid so it will move out of the way and not one-hit kill Karn? Perfectly fine. Cutting off a dead guy's hand for a fingerprint reader? Again, a little annoying, but totally fine.
What am I doing? This is really horrible.
Playing a shamisen with a bell to open a door? Dumb, but at least it's a one-item puzzle. I'm talking about puzzles like the breach in the wall. First, you have to put on a respirator so Kenzo doesn't suffocate seconds after entering the room, but doing this too soon will cause the game to lock up when the camera changes. For the record, this doesn't happen in the PC version, but those players do have a save corrupting bug to deal with. After the game locked up a couple more times for me, I actually don't know what I did to make it stop happening, there's a time limit in which to fix the breach. Let's ignore that the drop in atmospheric pressure would kill Kenzo with or without a respirator for a moment.
Science!
How do you fix the breach? Weld it shut with scrap metal? Fill the gap with quick-dry sealing polymer? Or how about shoving a deflated bopper toy balloon into the breach and blowing it up with a bike pump? Yes, this not only works, but somehow holds up for the entire game. I don't know if I hated that more or less than the flare gun puzzle. This requires opening a door with a trimorph on the other side and pulling a cartoonish hide around the corner trick to make it keep running down the hall.
Hey! He's turning left!
Then you have to enter the airlock it was standing in and, following the advice of a micro recorder that you may or may not have found and listened to, shove a scarab into the door, use a book to trigger a voice command that opens the airlock in 10 seconds, do the same Bugs Bunny-ass trick to get the Trimorph to run back in, and jettison the abomination out of the base. Note that the other Trimorphs in the game do not behave like this. They would just turn the corner and grind you into meat paste. Somehow, don't ask me how, this makes a flare gun, the only thing that can kill Trimorphs, spawn when the door closes again. These are the kinds of puzzles I absolutely hate. The kind where you have to abandon all logic, or which contradict stuff from other parts of the game. Actually, does the flare gun at least do something cool, like set Trimorphs on fire? I'm expecting something good because this gun doesn't work on any of the other enemies.
You cannot be serious!
Anyway, you have to get the bulkheads open. But the only way to do that is with the base's infomesh, a conscious neural computer network based on the personality of a real-life person. Only certain people, called meshers, can interact with them, often via telepathy, and not lose their damn minds. Kenzo's the one mesher in the group, so he does the talking with the base's network, called Mood.
Don't mesh with me, saucy boy. We haven't been formally introduced.
And yes, the narrator from the intro was Mood all along. I'll just say it up front, Mood's voice actress delivers the best performance in the whole game. As low a bar as that is to clear. I mean among the characters trying to sound good, so the Martian Mayhem voices don't count. Though I guess that's not surprising given that Mood's voice, Vanilla Fielding, had acting credits dating back to the 1950s. So Mood is low on power and can't do anything yet. But once Matlock finds the incredibly small space where the power core computer is, she pops a receptor panel back into the power source like it's a Lego brick, and now Mood has a bit more power and can answer some questions. She mostly just deflects to the databases on the computers, but after a while, I just refused to check them anymore because I wasn't learning anything of consequence. She does indicate that Karn knows something else about their mission, and Matlock isn't what she seems to be.
Mind you, Karn knows something you don't.
What does Karn know?
Ask Karn, but he won't tell you.
Can you tell me any more about Matlock?
She's not all she seems to be.
I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but one of these little teases doesn't lead to anything spectacular, and the other goes nowhere. Either the latter was a plot point that got axed in the rush to finish the game, or Mood just likes fucking around with Kenzo. I could believe either or both. By the way, that floating telepathic corpse? You just shoot it once and it's a normal non-dead for the rest of the game. Don't worry, there's plenty of other anticlimactic events later in the game too. Why did I say that like it was encouraging? Once more power reaches Mood, Kenzo can use the Lazy Boy meshing chair to go to a familiar environment to him as he interacts with the base's system. This is actually hinted at in a photo Kenzo starts the game with. The big flat rock is used to visualize the bulkhead locations in the base because... And Kenzo opens all the bulkheads. So now everyone can go everywhere. You might think this would present a problem as you're supposed to keep everyone separated. However, the base, while not particularly large, is just large enough that this wasn't a problem for me. There's an item everybody can pick up called a biosensor, which senses brain activity from nearby living things. It's supposed to help keep everyone apart, but I was almost never anywhere near one of the other characters, so I wound up ditching these pretty quickly. Besides, they have a limited charge. You know how you recharge them? By throwing them into a tanning bed.
Science!
You can still have two people in the same room, but nothing happens unless you get those two people within about 6 or 7 feet of each other. I only got a game over from this twice, and one was intentional because I didn't know if it would ever happen naturally. But when it did... According to my research, this was not supposed to be funny. But I laughed really hard the first time I saw it. I mean, it looks like Martian Gothic predicted the Get Down meme several years before it happened.
Get down, you little
There's a lot to unpack here. Aside from the awkward splicing between the three characters, the jump cut to the trimorph they turn into, yes, that's how they form, and the Japanese goodbye text, none of which has any sound, I'll remind you that this is what happens when two characters are too close to each other. So is the third person getting pulled through several walls of the base hundreds of feet away? It's revealed later that Kenzo, Matlock, and Karn each have a different strain of this Martian bacteria in them that's not only permeated throughout the entire base, but when they're in close enough proximity to each other, they naturally attract, or bring the hosts together, and then that causes them to form trimorphs. Tri, three, morph, monster thing. But if that's the case, how come none of the non-dead on the base are affected by this, including and especially the ones that are right next to each other? Or why doesn't it happen if a character with one strain and a non-dead with another are close to each other? Do they all coincidentally have just one type of strain? Does it only work on living hosts? Am I going to bring up the Marley meter again just so I can add a point to the wrong column again out of spite? No, I'm not that spiteful. Yet. Kenzo can control other bulkhead doors in other sections of the base, and this becomes part of another couple puzzles which involve using another team member as bait. This is a good idea, but it's executed clumsily. One involves luring a trimorph out of a place you need to explore and trapping it between two bay doors, which Kenzo locks. The other involves a trimorph very slowly chasing Matlock through a vent before Kenzo closes the vent behind Matlock. And this leads to another somewhat awkward note. Even though there's a lot of cooperation required between these three characters, they rarely speak to each other, and when they do, they usually don't say anything helpful.
Matlock, it's pretty dangerous out here. I think you better lock yourself in a jar until this is all over.
Okay, Carl. I'll lock myself in the toilet if you come out of the closet.
Big joke.
Even in this vent sequence, Matlock is calling out to Kenzo, but she's not doing it over the radio. She's just thinking out loud and hoping Kenzo does what he's supposed to. Considering that each character has different dialogue when they examine different items,
Karn would love to have this.
A Diabolus machine gun. German manufacture. Takes a 10,000 round clip at 100 rounds a second.
I was expecting there to be more communication between everyone, but instead I got 3 people tossing random items into vacuum tubes and hoping someone knows what to do with them. More wandering later, Karn finds, the irony is that this isn't a creative Easter egg at all. In this room is a whacked-out medical officer named Ben Gunn. Well, his real name's John Farr, but now he's taken the name of a character from Martian Mayhem 2. Those notes that sometimes appear in a specific vacuum tube, those are from him. He quotes Shakespeare at you and then reveals he's the one who put the keys and important items in weird places around the base. Is it just me, or does anyone else think that a crazy guy took all the weapons and important items and keys and scattered them around the base, including in places where that shouldn't be possible, is a worse explanation than just not explaining this at all? It's also apparent something else is wrong with him.
We are in you and around you. We, the born of Akarak, Solitary and Myriad. We are in the rhythm of your blood and breath, beat by beat.
So is this a ghost story now? What about the bacteria? I think a story recap is in order. Here's what we know. A massive multinational corporation called Earth Control wants to colonize and terraform Mars. It establishes its first base, the Vita Project, and then starts setting up others while the first base is operating. Vita Base digs underground as its theorized life on Mars retreated below the surface and survived thanks to thermal wells and hot springs. They find 3 types of Martian bacteria, as well as what looks like a big tomb in the process. After this discovery, people start having weird dreams about Akarak, which is the native name for the planet Mars, and the race which lived on it, called the Korakarak, who were thought to have abilities like telepathy and something resembling possession because they had a shared conscience. After they presumably died out over the course of billions of years, this race's memories and thoughts became encoded in the Martian bacteria. So the weird dreams are actually those alien thoughts encroaching on the crew's own minds. Is it science, or is it supernatural? The answer is yes. While the bacteria is supposed to eventually kill off the host in about 24 hours, it takes a while for the entire base to get overrun, partly because some of the base team tried sabotaging the operation, and now all 3 characters have 3 objectives. Try to escape the base, maybe deal with whatever caused all of this, and find a cure for the bacteria they're harboring, which one can assume they might have gotten from the decontamination sequence at the beginning of the game that they said felt weird. Also, I have no idea why the non-dead behave like zombies and bite people when they aren't hungry like zombies and don't need bites to transmit the bacteria. Got it? Good, because I'm not repeating any of that. There are still other weird puzzles left to do, like shoving rocks into a sculpture and hitting it with a tuning fork so it'll stop dealing psychic damage to the crew. Look, even though the game mentions at several points that the Korakarak incorporate music and psychic abilities into their way of life, my explanation for some of the things that happen later in this game are probably going to sound really silly. But even so, there's one thing working in the player's favor, which I honestly don't know if it's supposed to. Because of the massive amount of saves across all the computers in the game, save scumming is not just a viable strategy for Martian Gothic, it is the strategy. And there are so many saves across so many computers that you can end up saving after solving a single puzzle or opening up one new room, and still have plenty of saves available for the endgame. I know that's possible because that's exactly what I did. Oh, and here's a micro recorder with possibly the worst acting in the whole game.
You're right, Angel. We should have disobeyed orders. Now we are dead for sure. Or worse. True love's being breached. Something's oozing through the vent. Something big. It's where we found their faces, and they're all looking at me. I can't get out. I'll send this message through his attack right now.
There are a few other contenders, but I think it just narrowly beats out this one.
I'm safe in here. I'm safe. God in heaven. They're coming through the walls.
Matlock eventually finds a lab where Ben Gunn was trying to work on a vaccine for the alien bacteria, which is still a long way off, but she can still send syringes to the other crew members to get blood samples. The other team members do this without Matlock telling them what to do or why.
What you want from me, Matlock? Blood?
Well, that's my blood sample if anyone wants it.
And here's a random question for you. Matlock currently has 3 blood samples from all of the team members in her inventory, and those blood samples have the 3 different strains of bacteria that try to attract to each other if they're in close enough proximity. Why aren't they doing that now or when they're all together in the centrifuge? But she still needs trimorph tissue and some mystery alien fluid to finish the cure. It was around this point that I noticed the game starting to fall apart. Well, actually the game freezing was when I noticed it, but more weird stuff started happening regularly. For one, what are these bricks following my shadow around? Sometimes I'd open my inventory and the selection cursor would be floating way off to one side under a completely different character. Some doors which were unlocked would randomly say access denied, or phase through part of the ceiling when they opened. Animations for some non-dead would die completely, and other times I could see non-dead or extrudes through walls, as in shuffling around on top of them. That is, of course, when they weren't just teleporting. Sometimes my shots simply wouldn't land no matter how close I was to my target. Grab animations weren't lining up. The game would start chugging and go into slow motion in some areas. I could sometimes search dead bodies that got up and walked away a long time ago. And in the scene I just showed you, Matlock provided analysis of an organic alien sample which she didn't have. Meanwhile, a lot of these computers have voice recordings and journals from the base's project director, Judith Haraway. She hints at something a few times before ultimately revealing that she is very significant to one of the team members.
Judith and Khan had a son together, and the boy died. No wonder Khan was so eager to come to Mars. He wanted to know if Judith had forgiven him.
I just want to say that it wasn't your fault he died. I should never have walked out on you. Martin, I miss you.
She's quiet and still. I'm sorry. I really am.
I am truly sorry, Martin. Truly, truly sorry. Also, we'll be having fish sticks on Thursday, and the men's bathroom is out of order until further notice.
Okay, people, I'm as ready as I'll ever be. Let's find the thing that caused all this and blow it to hell.
I just want to note that when Karn says this, he's not using the radio. He just says this out loud to Judith's corpse. He does eventually explain to the group, with the radio turned on this time, that he and Judith were part of a resistance group undermining Earth control, who are trying to harness the psychic powers of Mars as a weapon.
Maybe you got the idea that Thule stood for some form of bacterial warfare, an alien bioweapon.
I knew it couldn't be bacterial warfare research. That would be a complete waste of time.
Except the psychic shit is directly tied to the bacteria, so how are you gonna have the psionic weapons without the vessel through which they would function?
With science!
Wait, non-dead can use guns now? Well, apparently not. This is the only one that does it, and when you shoot the gun out of this one's hand, he's just a regular non-dead for the rest of the game. It's like they wanted to do more with these guys, but either ran out of time or had no idea how to make it work for the whole game. Eventually you gain access to the underground catacombs where the crew dug up part of a Martian civilization, and holy shit, would someone please tell the soundtrack to shut the fuck up. This is also around when you can find and repair a laptop, which can be used to save anywhere at any time. I mean, thanks, but I still wasn't even close to running out of saves.
Looks like a cathedral.
That name drop might have been more effective if I could actually hear it. This is also a space where you can fall into one of many crevasses and die. And yes, this also completely breaks sometimes. Down here is a trimorph hanging out in front of an obelisk, only this one is invincible. Just trust me, it is. The game does drop hints about putting an alien artifact into the obelisk and getting the Trimorph to hit it, but the PC version actually shows the Trimorph hitting the obelisk, which makes this much easier to understand. It also shows the Trimorph as a different color instead of just looking like all the others, so you can tell something's different about it. This is another time where one team member acts as bait and gets the Trimorph to chase them. It's,
Oh my God! He's turned me into a mime!
While the Trimorph is stuck doing the running man with no peripheral vision or hearing, you slide up alongside it, slip the artifact into the obelisk, it quote-unquote hits it, loses its invincibility, and you flare gun it out of existence. Meanwhile, Kenzo found a suit and wandered out to a cemetery where... Alright, I need to explain something. There are logs of a guy named Whitaker, who was one of or the first guy to die at the base. He was buried, but it's said that they found his grave empty and footprints leading away from it. But when Kenzo checks outside...
I am the first, reborn of the red soil.
Whitaker's ghost is there, at a grave that's still intact. Do I need to explain why this doesn't make sense? Anyway, Kenzo has a new weapon, the Sayonara, spelled with a P-S-I because that is kakoi, which can take down enemies, including ghosts, at the cost of a sliver of health. So you can just instantly neutralize the monologuing ghost with it. Alright, if I keep explaining every puzzle in detail, this video is going to be another 20 minutes long, so here's the short version. Ben Gunn chops his own head off. This head and a heart reanimate a corpse for a few seconds, which you take the heart out of and stuff it into the tomb, which drops the barrier around the Karakarak hibernating inside. Then someone goes full Mission Impossible and extracts alien milk from the Martian. Yes, alien milk. And the milk is used to finish the cure. Again, none of what anyone does is relayed to any other team member. Everyone just assumes everything. This sequence is also around when many new items just don't have descriptions if you try to examine them. Now that everyone's cured, Karn grabs some explosives and sets them to detonate near a fissure to release lava through the caverns and the base. This is when Mood single-handedly costs Karn about 30 seconds of escape time explaining what's going on. Also, the Karakarak is loose, I guess? Thankfully, you only have to guide Karn to the shuttle bay to escape. Everyone else is already there and not getting attacked by the non-dead for some reason. Gee, I'm sure glad all three of them can escape from...
3 are coming. Only 2 will leave.
Yeah, good thing I'm not attached to any of these characters. The catch is, the roof hatch is stuck closed and has to be opened manually. Karn goes to open it, nearly gets talked to death by Mood, but opens the hatch in time for Matlock and Kenzo to escape as he and the base are unceremoniously incinerated. No final words from anyone, Karn's just dead. The pod flies into space, and... Wait, hold on, I think I accidentally hit a button while the cutscene was playing. Let's try that again. Kenzo and Matlock escape the base and the planet, and while drifting through... space? That's it? That's seriously it? The PC version of this game also has an unsatisfying closing statement from Mood. Don't ask me how she's still talking if the base is deep fried. As well as a credit sequence, but on the PlayStation? Nope, neither of those made it.
Well, gang, I guess we did it. We managed to find a game with an ending that makes...
Alright, now you're raising the bar.
...seem fulfilling. And now seems like a good time for the big reveal. Who was this person that really hated how Martian Gothic Unification turned out? The designer of Martian Gothic Unification, Stephen Marley.
Marley has done a few interviews over the years, and any time Martian Gothic came up, he would always have something illuminating to say about it. When Retro Action magazine asked if he was pleased with the final product, this is what he said. Short answer, no. Long answer, how long have you got? For one thing, the original Unification version of the game, the adventure game,
it was scrapped due to what he called in-house dramas. But even though Marley's name Martian Gothic fit the new iteration of the game, Creative Reality insisted on keeping the word Unification at the end, both because they thought it fit the theme, and the guy who came up with that was a Star Trek fan, and one of his favorite episodes was called Unification. Yes, really.
Is it embarrassing that I know his name is Galron?
Yes.
I thought so.
Along with the name came the item-based puzzle solving Unification originally had, which, as someone who did not like point-and-click adventure games, Marley absolutely hated. His exact words for this part of the game were, quote, "Find this and that, and use this with this and that with that. Pain in the neck."
Something else might this go with this, that, something.
He hated this so much that his personal website, which looks like it was originally hosted by either Angelfire, Tripod, or GeoCities, uses a trivia blurb to take a dig at this part of the game. But even though he was the game's designer, other guys on the team would supersede his design choices. Thus, according to Marley, action sequences such as Karn fighting beefed-up undead monsters and a proper final boss fight never made it in, but those item puzzles he hated did. He also wanted the entire interior of the base to be larger and look more like an English manor, reasoning that if people were going to be stuck on Mars, they'd want the place they're stuck in to feel like home and not, you know, a factory. Instead, a lot of it just looks like a factory, with occasional rooms providing a more jarring, just-like-home aesthetic that comes and goes. On the voice front, Marley wanted to have appropriate ethnic voice actors. They cast a Japanese guy for Kenzo, a British lady for Matlock, and the voice studio he was working with said multiple times that they cast an African-American guy to voice the African-American character Karn. He got to the studio and saw that they filled the role of this African-American character with a white British guy.
And with that level of dysfunction and disjointedness, it's not that surprising that this was Creative Reality's final game before they shut down. And hell, they barely got this game to a finish line at all.
This game forced me to completely rethink how I evaluate games for $5 gaming. It was just a simple yes or no answer to the question, is it worth the price? When looking back at everything in this game and my time playing it, I ultimately have to ask how I feel about this game versus another game I got for $1 and said wasn't worth it, the crappy Dreamcast port of Urban Chaos. That's a game I hated so much I destroyed the disc, and the two halves of it are now part of the decor in my living room. Do I hate Martian Gothic more than Urban Chaos? No, I don't. Does that mean I think Martian Gothic, or at least this version of it, was worth the $1 admission price? No. While I didn't outright hate Martian Gothic, it was really damn annoying to play, and that feeling only got worse the longer I played it. The glitches that added up over the course of the game, the useless or borderline useless items I couldn't effectively throw out, the excess items making me think I was missing something and clogging up my inventory, the items I found and subsequently didn't use for hours at a time, the way the horror parts of the game usually don't get a reaction other than boredom and apathy out of the cast, having to backtrack multiple times for some out-of-the-way item I didn't know existed, the Looney Tunes logic to several of the puzzles, the narcolepsy-inducing combat, all of that weighed on me. Also, that video game hint book Kenzo starts the game with, that can be used to enter cheats in the PC version. But on the PlayStation, it does nothing. So that's an extra kick in the dick. And the one thing I was legit entertained by, the Martian Mayhem 2 dialogue, was way too short and had no conclusion because almost all of it, including the minigame it was supposed to be a part of, was cut. I was so reluctant to continue playing this game that I had to have another game I liked on standby between recording sessions. So no, I don't recommend the PlayStation version of Martian Gothic, even for $1. Hell, Marley himself described the game as, quote, rushed out, incomplete, and had an understandably mixed reaction, unquote. Marley said that he wrote a prequel for a Martian Gothic 2 and that they always had a sequel in mind while they were working on this. Which... Alright. So, that title card I have where it looks like I'm thinking about strangling Stephen Marley, that was kind of bait. I don't hate the guy, I don't even dislike the guy. Which is why I want to give some constructive advice. Instead of Martian Gothic 2, make Martian Mayhem 3, the new worst game in the universe.
Groovy.